So thank you for coming and joining us for Let's Get Engaged. My name is Zanelle Brown. I serve as the Executive Court Administrator for the Third Circuit Court, downtown Detroit, Michigan. So into Aretha Franklin, Motor City, and everything like that. So may I get a yay? Yay. All right. And this is my General Counsel.
I'm Rich Lynch. I work in the same court. We've been working together for about 5 years now. They lured me down from another county, and I really enjoy it, and it's been a very innovative and expansive process for me. So you'll probably see that as we interact during the course of this presentation, even though our magnetic attraction is apparently driving us apart so we don't give you feedback. Although if we do it, I can start doing a Jimi Hendrix imitation, so we'll see what happens there. So we're here to talk about what's going to happen today. And you've learned an awful lot over the past day. You had a tremendous amount of knowledge as you came into this building. So what we're going to do is build upon that. And we're going to talk at you a little bit right at the beginning, and then we're going to have an interactive procedure and work with you on that. Ideally, what you're going to do as you walk away from this today is have a template where you can take a challenge that's confronting your court, take it back to your court, and start working through this template to address that immediate issue. We hope that you're going to have a nice template to you, we're going to hand this out to you, and we're going to have you work through this process. As I indicated a little bit earlier in the morning, for those of you who go to conferences and you're like me, I'm in my old private zone of privacy here. I'm here to learn, just leave me alone. Well, we're going to mess with that. Apparently when I get on this side of the podium, there is no zone of privacy. We're going to have you interact with each other. If you're seated next to people you don't know, you've just made a new friend. Yay! So what happens in Vegas? You get a friend from Vegas. So,
don't take them home.
Although she'll willingly push me off if I keep up like this. However, we're going to have you work together on this just to have some interactive process, and what we're going to do is we're going to have you reach out to us and respond and address some of your issues, because my guess is we all have a variety of similar issues, but given the nature of our jurisdictions, they're all peculiar to our jurisdiction. So that just gives you a rough overview of what the heck we're going to talk about. And we're going to touch upon some lessons that we've learned as we've gone through the process. We're going to touch upon, use a case study of our FOC model. And that's our Friend the Court for Our Children learning lesson that we did to address one of the challenges that we had. And we're going to work through these processes and help provide you with some information of stumbling blocks that we encountered during this, as well as successes that we've enjoyed as we've done this process. And for those of you who were in here earlier, I wander around a little bit. I'm going to try not to cut in front of the screen, but I don't want to leave you folks on the other side of the room out, so I'll just be walking back and forth, so please bear with me.
So the outline of the presentation, we want to share with you some background, and then we're going to get actually into the meat of the presentation where you're working through the template. We're going to use the template. It's called 7 Stages to Create an Action Plan. It connects to the Nahum Essential Component for Operational Management. Rich has already mentioned our case study for our children, Friend of the Court for Our Children, FOC. We'll talk about lessons learned, best practices, and like I said, we'll complete the action plan. Just as far as background, you've heard a lot of it while you've been at the conference this week, talking just about public trust and confidence. We've looked at what our state court administrator has put out. We do a public survey every year at the Third Circuit Court to try to gauge what does the public actually think about us. We're also aware of the studies that have been done by the National Center, including the listening tour, that also looks at this. So we know it's very critical for us to operate in the changing world that we live in, that we do have processes in place that went over the public. How to build public trust is basically built off of several precepts that relate to people's individual interactions with the court. Do they perceive the court as being a place where they can basically be treated fairly and get a fair chance? The bullets up there, they want the courts to be just, not only to be just, but to appear to be just. They want us to resolve disputes timely. They want us to be able to explain our processes, so the transparency there. They also want transparency and consistency with our court procedures. And we need to make sure that we're providing information about court processes, services, and mechanisms in which to access them.
And as you think about public trust and confidence, one of the things that we as courts have to consider is that, quite honestly, we possess a monopoly. Okay, there's some ADR mechanisms that are out there that people work upon. But primarily, if you have a dispute, there are few places where you can go and have those disputes resolved. And as part of that dispute resolution process, courts cover the full panoply of issues that happen in our lives. There might be different courts that address some of these issues. There might be a probate court, there might be a municipal or district court, there might be a general jurisdiction trial court, and we have the appellate courts. However, when people become involved in these processes, they're rarely looking at this as their lottery day. Woohoo, I get to go to court today! Regardless of what is bringing them to the institution. Think about it. Think of the attorneys who come to court who are constantly grumbling. Oh, I gotta go to court and go before Judge such and such today. Or jury duty. We all know jurors are always extremely enthusiastic about coming to court. Then you have witnesses, you have parties. A lot of people who come to court, they're coming there for reasons they would prefer in their lives did not occur, and they would prefer not to be involved with us. So they come with this mindset, and then they come to an institution. Oftentimes it's very imposing, and it's frankly relatively cold and austere. And you see signs, we cannot give you legal advice. And depending upon how people interpret that, you get a response that we can't help you. So people come here, I was looking for the flippin' bathroom. You can't tell me where the bathroom is? Oh, I can't give you legal advice. Excuse me. Sometimes people lose the forest through the trees, and they become so focused on the minutiae, their little quadrant of the universe, that they essentially alienate the people they are charged with trying to help. Obviously, the people in this room aren't part of that because you are here learning and you're doing things and you're expanding your professionalism. So we're essentially preaching to the choir. I promise I won't sing because then everyone will leave the choir loft. However, what we need to do is get some information so we can take it back and work with the people to make our courts more flexible. Think about courts. When you think about courts, do you think of agile, responsive to change? Big show of hands if that's what your immediate response is. Okay, a little less agile. Ossified, slow to change, stone cold slow, unresponsive. Maybe those sometimes feel like they're more where we're at as a court. And that's good in a way, because what you don't want to have happen is a foundational institution like a court that's just swaying in the breeze and you're not really sure where the heck it goes. One of the reasons that we lawyers love precedent so much, it gives us something we can tell our clients, allows a certain level of predictability as to what the heck is going to happen. Unlike the casino that we walk through, it's not all up to chance. So we like that about courts. However, at the same time, we have to recognize that we as a society are changing and we as courts need to address some of those things. I'm not saying, and we're not going to push you to become exceptionally flexible and just run around like a chicken with your head cut off. But as you look at some of the things that are up there, it just causes a moment's thought to say, how can we address some of those needs? Because there have been things. For example, the recent Supreme Court decision ratifying same-sex marriage. Well, many states don't have laws that go with that, and they don't necessarily have procedures. And then when you address issues, for example, when you have a same-sex couple and they have a child, well, if that child was conceived within the course of that union, at least in Michigan and many other jurisdictions, it is presumed to be issue of that marriage. Well, how are we going to address that? Because you have something that may be a factual impossibility, but now you have a legal fact. How are we as courts going to do this, especially in light of the fact that the legislature isn't always responsive and ready to take some of these hot button issues? People talk about judicial activism. Sometimes we get that gift of judicial activism because there hasn't been any other movement in any of the other branches. So just keep that in mind. We're not asking you to be all willy-nilly, but we do have to be responsive.
So one of the most interesting things that have happened to me this year is we're building a new criminal courthouse. And in that criminal courthouse, we have to have bathrooms. So how many are facing issues with bathrooms? So do you have men's rooms, ladies' rooms? Do you have unisex rooms? Do you have multiple stalls? What do you do when someone asks your employee, where is this restroom? and you're looking at the employee, but you identify the person as a different gender or something like that. So I mean, we're talking about how do we as a court actually get to dealing with present day situations. So some of the dynamics Rich has already mentioned. You have your self-represented litigants, your limited English proficient court users, same-sex couples, single parents. You have protected groups you got to look out for, those who are protected under the ADA, and then we have our favorite group of sovereign citizens. So now, thinking of all the things that you got going on in this diverse world of court management, I'm going to ask if Charleston, who's volunteered to do so, would hand out some of the handouts, and we're going to go ahead and finish the plan, or put the plan together, and we're going to give you like the plan so you can work with it in groups. So make sure you got a pencil and paper so you can take your own notes. You'll see the plan when it's attached to your PowerPoint, so you'll have that to take home with you. This is one of the things you actually can take from Vegas. It doesn't have to stay here. And you can get to work on it. So we're going to ask that you introduce yourself to the person on your right and your left. Tell them your name and where you're from.
You can smack me if I keep going off too much.
I got it. It's not going to be that many. I think he may have like 2.
I have a couple.
Okay.
Wow.
So every individual may not have an action plan.
Let's see how many extra.
So if I can get your attention for 1 second. Every individual may not have an action plan. We're going to ask that you work in groups. But remember, there is an action plan in the PowerPoint, so you will have that to take home with you. So we've mentioned what the Friend of the Court for Our Children was. So let me give you a little highlights, because we're going to refer to it throughout as we're filling out the action plan. It was created in 2006. Our Friend of the Court had basically gone through a negative media blitz. I think at that time there was a case where the support cycle had continued to cycle, but the child had been deceased for a number of years. Of course, no one thought to tell the Friend of the Court. And our Friend of the Court is our child support agency. They assumed that there was a big computer in the back and somehow the workers would know that this was the case and stop the support. So of course you have this 6 o'clock news blast, terrible court system, and all the workers come, the managers come to work the next day, and everybody's pissed because they're like, nobody told us the child was deceased. There was no way we could have found out about it. We never get a fair break, yada, 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 yada. And we were actually fed up with being put in that position. It was like, so what can we do to actually change it? We're not helpless. So at that point in time, the managers decided, really nobody wanted to hear from us. We were already demonized. They would be more willing to hear from others in the community who they interacted with. So we decided to identify those others in the communities. They were labor unions, fatherhood groups, Greek affiliations, sororities and fraternities, faith-based groups, and everything like that. So we decided, how about we say we want to go to our local workforce training and development center and invite them there, tell them we'll give them breakfast, and tell them the predicament that we're in. We believe that there's really just a lack of knowledge about what we do as a court. Not necessarily that we're out to get anyone or anything like that, but they don't understand what we do and what we need for them to do. At that time, we had about 300,000 open cases charging child support, and we had less than 250 workers. So there was no way that we as an institution were able to make sure all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed if people were not being in charge of their own case. So we took this on. It was a volunteer effort with the managers and the staffing. And at that first meeting, there was about 80 stakeholders and partners who said, yeah, I either want to complain about what you do or learn about what you do. And then by the end, everyone was like, we want to help you with what you do. We want to make sure that you get a message out. From that experiment, we ended up with certain dockets, specialty court dockets. One is called Power Court, providing opportunities for work, employment, and responsibility, where we actually not just collect support, but actually pair the absent parent with job resources and training to help that person be able to pay the support. And we ended up with our first bench warrant amnesty program here in Wayne County. So those are the highlights of the program. So like I said, we'll refer to them throughout as we go through the stages, and I'm turning the next slide over to Rich.
So as we look at this, we have identified these various stages, and they're in the PowerPoint materials. You can download it back home. But we're just going to touch upon these really quickly, and we're going to blow through this as you see this so we can get to the important information and allow you to start working through the template. Because again, we're now down to our time's winding down. We want to make sure you have this template to take back to the office, take back to your court, and have something to take away and actually act upon this, as opposed to having us just talk with you. So let's move on to stage one. Let's identify your public trust and your public perception challenges. Well, you have the paper already, so that's a good thing. So what's a public trust issue that you have within your court? I bet if you take a moment or so, and we're going to give you a second just to talk about this with people around you, you can identify one or two of these. But what is something that has a trust or a confidence issue within your court, within your community, that causes people to be less receptive to the work and the mission that your court performs? Now, we lay out a couple of things here, be it the negative news headlines like we had with our friend in the court, persistent nagging problems. This could be slow dockets, getting cases through, resolving bench warrants, getting them out of your criminal justice information system, collecting back child support. It could be things, how long it takes to get a case into mediation or out of mediation, to get people into family counseling, to supervise parenting time. Something, unless you're the true unicorn, and if you are, I want to meet you, that you have a court that doesn't have a challenge. If you are, please raise your hand because I want to know what you're doing. But we have these issues that are out there. And as general counsel, one of the issues that really brings things to my attention happens to be that last one. When we start getting lawsuits. Now, they may or may not have a firm foundation as to why a person is filing a lawsuit, but if someone's going to take the time to file a lawsuit, something is bothering that individual. I will go out on a limb and I will say that much. And it takes time and resources and energy from your institution to respond to that. So maybe you have a lawsuit or a number of lawsuits that have arisen out of a similar type issue that could be your persistent issue. So, do we have anyone who, first of all, do we have anyone here who is our unicorn, who doesn't have any issues and is like, gosh, I'm wasting my time. I don't know why these people have these problems.
So shout out some issues. Tell us what's going on. What are some of the things? I'm sorry?
Okay.
We only want their money. Other ones.
Don't have much.
Just want me to go to jail. That's all courts are for. What else?
Collecting past fines and costs.
That's all you care about. You don't care about the person. We just want our money. We want the fines and the costs.
That's my job.
That's your job. You got a whole industry built on it.
No justice for poor people. I'm from Jamaica.
I'm sorry?
I'm from Jamaica. I say no justice for poor people.
No justice for the poor. No justice, no peace. What else? Inconsistent information. I go to the third floor, I find out one thing. I go to the fourth floor and someone tells me something else, and then you send me back to the third floor. So what data do you have that actually supports that these are issues? How do you know how big the issue is? Who has the issue?
And data is got to be the big issue, because if you go to your funding unit when you say, we need more money to be able to perform this, or you're trying to respond to a lawsuit that says you're depriving people of their rights, or one of the big issues out here after the Miller-Montgomery cases involving juvenile lifers is, how many people do we have that fall within this population? And two, what is the proper response to address these individuals? So you have to look at these and you have to find out what information you have. And odds are, if you're like any other governmental institution I have ever encountered, you have more data than you know what to do with. You might not know where all the data is, and different departments and different sections may have data that is related but has not been correlated. But you need to gather that information together and start managing that so you know what to do with it. Because as you gather this data, it's going to allow you to define the issues that you have before you and to work through that process so you can start, one, identifying the issues, two, start crafting solutions towards the issues that you have identified. Because if you just start shooting from the hip and offering solutions, but you don't know what the true scope of the problem is, well, what do you think the odds of success for that type of approach are? Again, we're probably going to do better out in the casino than we are if that's going to be the model that we're going to use for our success. Instead, we have to have that foundation. And by having that foundation, we get to go out to our stakeholders, be they internally, be they externally. We get to identify champions, and we get to work forward towards that solution so we can address those needs, and we can be responsive to the people in our public. A lot of people are on all sides of the fence regarding founding principles, things like that. One of the things that they typically don't talk about is the fact that the enlightened philosophers that our founding fathers relied upon thought about this idea of a social compact philosophically, and if there's any philosophy majors in here, I apologize. It's going to be a really broad stretch. However, okay, a lot of enlightened principles have been shot down. But the concept of a social compact, think Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, things like that. That is, we are all working together for the greater good. We all have something that's in this process together. The example I like to use on this is that neat little red octagon that keeps cropping up on the side of the road. Well, if only a third of us or half of us abide by that neat little red octagon, imagine what's going to happen in our society. Or depending upon your neighborhood, you may already be operating there and driving is a real treat. But you get the idea. If people aren't going to buy into central principles, you're going to have some challenges. So that could be one of your issues, that people don't see that they have investment in the process that's in place. So you have to look at that. How do you have the data to address those types of things?
So take a moment and identify 2 or 3 of your big issues in your court, share it with your neighbor, and then look at some of the resources and data that actually helps inform you about what that problem is, the scope of it. So take a moment and do that.
For those who want a physical sheet of paper, they have y'all download. There's an app on our phone that we have that document on our phone. We go to the app.
I told them that it's in their PowerPoint.
Everybody says where the paper. So
Okay.
not now. I'm just saying they should know that.
Okay.
Are we coming through okay?
Oh, excuse me. No, you need to duck before you walk past me.
I thought this gave us an opportunity to catch both sides of the room a little more effectively.
So I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that we learned.
Okay, if we can bring it back in, because I know you've now solved all the issues you've identified, right? Everything's good.
So let me start with some of the lessons we learned. Make sure you give that person next to you, number 1, your business card, because you will want to continue this conversation after the event.
Okay, if I can bring you all back in. Otherwise, we're never going to make it through. So let's focus here, and we're going to talk about some of the lessons that we have learned. Or maybe not.
So one of the things, it feels like you're in a room with people who can identify with you. So you're willing to admit that you have a problem. You're willing to put the effort forth in looking for a solution to that problem. You have to be willing to address whatever your issue is and not dig in to defend your position. That's what we learned at that table that day. We had constantly had that managers meeting. We would constantly come back after the media had made an attack on our friend of the court and defend why we were right. I mean, after all, we are the champions of justice. But the media didn't care about that. So we had to start looking at things like our new filings, our annual reports, the news lines, and actually paying attention, looking at our focus groups that we have brought in, looking at what people were saying on our surveys, looking at our grievance reports that were sent to our state court administrator's office, and pulling out that stuff and being willing to share it. We had to become transparent and we had to become vulnerable. We started standardizing a lot of reports so we would have that information readily available. So when something came up in the media, not only did we have a counter position, we had stats. Or we could verify and confirm what they were saying and then move forward as far as that was concerning. So how many of you have a lot of standardized reports that you're relying on routinely to inform you? How many of you are doing surveys and focus groups? Those are great ways to get your data out. So put that down in your stage number 2. And also, I was told by Charleston to remind you on the app, the form is right there for you as well as a handout. So let's move to number 3. You got a number of trust challenges, a number, but you have to figure out which one is the time right for you right now to work on. What do you have the resources for? What is the public willing to come behind you and support you on? Where can you actually make a difference? And the best of times, you have the opportunity to look through your list and choose one. And the worst of times, one is going to be thrown right there in your face. So look at your challenges that you've listed and just circle one that you want to work on at this point. Now let's move to item number 4, stage number 4. Let's talk a little bit about stakeholders and partners. Nahum basically says court leaders should enhance public opinions and perceptions by partnering with community and other branches and governmental agencies. Absolutely. Start listing those agencies down and those leaders of those agencies who can help you resolve your particular problem.
Most importantly, remember the greatest and perhaps most important internal stakeholder that you have is your bench. If you have bench buy-in, this process becomes far easier to facilitate. If you go forward and you develop a really great plan, but you just spring it on the bench after the process and just say, we found this great idea. And they're going to ask, why? What's this? And they're going to have a bunch of questions. They're going to start dissecting it. So bring the bench in, perhaps not the entire bench. We've been here, we've learned that our court has 58 judges on it. There are some courts that I've seen, I think Orange County had 134 judges. I think it was Palm Beach, they had well over 100 judges. So there's a lot of judges out there. Sometimes if it's a smaller court, you have hopefully a better working relationship, you can interact, but you need to get some of those judges into the process and be your stakeholders. If you don't do this, you're just making the process more challenging. They don't necessarily have to attend each and every meeting. They don't have to be the be-all, end-all for the process. They don't have to carry all of the load, but you want them in there from the ground level. It's just going to make the process work more effectively.
Also list your non-traditional partners. Start thinking out of the box. Does anyone have an example of what a non-traditional partner would be on their particular issue? Maybe a member of the public, so you have a public perception, a public voice there. What else? The Chamber of Commerce, definitely. Any other ideas? Yeah.
We work with Haven, which is a batter support program, and so we can dad the kids on site.
Okay.
That take the steps to facilitate that for our domestic violence cases.
So Haven or another domestic violence service provider.
Faith-based organizations.
Faith-based organizations.
We have a judge who's going into prison after sentencing and interviewing the defendant to see how it went.
So a judge who goes into the prison after sentencing to see how everything actually transpired. Awesome.
Doing it very small.
Very small groups. So you have a number of non-traditional people you can invite to your table. List some of those down. Like I said, one of our greatest events, we are part of an expungement event once a year that has like over 1,000 people there. And the expungement event is put on by the Deltas of Detroit, one of the Greek sororities. So we're like so glad to partner with them, because that's 1,000 people otherwise who would not come to our doors or trust us. But they are trusting that sorority, and we get to actually benefit from that. So we talked about labor unions, we talked about admitting your challenges, and recognizing and admitting that you're working on a challenge and you need help and input from others. And one of the things not to forget is to know who your opposition and your detractors are, because you want to invite them to the table. You want to see what their real arguments are and listen to them. They may have something to give you some insight in what you can change. And if not, you may be able to explain why you can't change it or why the system exists the way it is. One of the things that we often were challenged with our child support agency was some of the rules and laws that we were following. And we explained that that's the law in the book. We're here as the arm of the court to enforce the law. We didn't make it. Maybe there's some things that we can do as far as putting you in contact with legislatures to come to the table to have actually help make that change.
And as you look at this, you need to then go about and start assembling your team. We've already talked about the fact you're going to have a number of people from within the court operation that have an interest in addressing this issue. You're going to reach out to those internal stakeholders, including the bench, including your funding unit, including other individuals or entities that are working with you. You're going to reach out to those external stakeholders. Maybe there are public interest groups that are out there that have a voice in this activity that can help you out. Maybe you have places like the faith-based organizations or community operations or NGOs that have a voice, they have an interaction, they can help you move this ball forward. I'm not saying you have to be intellectually in lockstep mindset with these entities, but what you need to do is get out there, have that conversation. Just because you're having the conversation doesn't mean you have to give up your core values. But when you start listening, as we heard yesterday, and you start taking that information in, you get to see how other people view you. And that helps you move this ball forward. So you get those forward and start selecting champions. I select and use the plural for a purpose. If you select one champion, what happens if that person moves on? If they start going to a different direction? A catastrophe strikes. Who knows? By identifying multiple champions, you can reach out and work within your community, and odds are they have perhaps similar but different networks. So you expand the scope, the reach that you have as you work within this community, and gives you more of an opportunity to address the needs that you have. And as my mother used to say, many hands make light work. We all have been part of organizations where you have one person or just a few people who are doing all of the work. I like to think of the church ladies. You have certain ladies who take care of the funerals, they take care of the vestments, this, that, and the other thing. It's almost always the same handful of people who are doing this type of thing. Well, ultimately, they tend to be older women and they die off, and then it becomes a crisis moment. What are we going to do? So you want to spread this out so you're not putting a burden upon any particular group, but you're reaching out and making sure these things happen. And this also allows you to give a voice to more people. And that's a critical component as you try to address these challenges.
So identify your champions. Identify who you want on your team, who's critical to be on your team. This is that point where you'll put that down in your notes or on the sheet if you actually have a sheet in front of you. Remember, people want to be involved in solving big problems. So I haven't met many people who said no. Once you put the offer out there, if you tell them what you're about, most people are going to say yes and ask how can they help. Our leaders and decision makers must be engaged with the issue. So you don't just want someone who is going to show up for the photo op. You want someone who's actually going to be engaged and continue to share your message. So be careful about who you have on your team. And as Rich pointed out, you also want to be careful that you have some type of succession planning built in, because leaders get promoted, leaders do retire, and yes, they do die sometimes. So you want to make sure that you have all of that because you believe that this is something that is going to go on and on. The Friend of the Court for Our Children, like I said, has been around since 2006. It has had some strong leaders. It has had some strong team members. At sometimes, maybe the leader wasn't as strong, but the team was stronger. So it's been able to survive because the people in the community have bought into it. Rich, number 6.
So before I move into developing your goals, do we have any question, comments, concerns to where we're at right now? Do you get the idea, the mindset, and the template that we're using in developing and how to make it happen within your community? The conversations you had within your individual groups. Can you think of ways that those issues can be refined so you can start identifying those champions, naming those stakeholders, and now developing the goals to make this happen? Because in a few moments we're going to take a break and I'm going to want you to get together and work with your partners again and just start brainstorming how you make this happen. But as you look at this, you need to look at for example, the Nahum Core. They had 2 sessions on that yesterday. And ton of information. In the 20 or so minutes we have left, odds are I can do a tremendous disservice. So I'm going to skip that component and allow you to all go back to that as opposed to trying to give you a thumbnail sketch that's going to be fairly lousy. But you have things like this in play. And you look at these, the operations management, and how you put the principle, the practice, and the vision together. How are you going to do this? And how are you going to make these goals happen? Because until you identify this, it becomes a really big challenge. Back in the day, I used to run a lot. And when I was competing, what I would do is I would get a new pair of racing shoes at the start of a season. And the first thing I would do, after taking entirely too much time to identify which pair of shoes actually fit, is I would take them home and I would write my goal on the heel of the shoe as soon as I got home. Before I ran a step in these things, I would put the goal in. And the reason I did this is because it gave me a constant reminder every time I laced up and I went out to do my run, what the heck I was doing this for, what my goal was, how I was going to try to achieve this. And I would look at that and it's like, okay, that's the goal. What do I have to do to get there? And it's the same thing here. Fortunately, when it's 100 degrees, you're not going out and trying to kill yourself by running, so there's a certain advantage to being in here listening to me drone on. But it gives you something to do. You want to reduce these concepts to writing, because otherwise, I promise you, they will not happen. They will probably become worse until you get to the moment that you have this crisis moment where you're on the front page of the newspaper, or you're the lead story on the evening news, or you have something like that going on, or the internet's blowing up with whatever is happening. You do not want to be that individual. You do not want to be that organization. Sometimes events happen. We can't control that. We all know that. We don't live in some isolated rural universe where we deny reality. These things can happen. And we know by working in the vocation that we work in, that we have challenges that are going to happen because we identify all of the life moments that people are going to have, that businesses are going to have. And our society doesn't work if we don't work. So we have to identify these goals. So what I would ask is, let's see, I would say let's take about 5 minutes. That'll get us up to the hour, and that'll give us about 15 minutes after that. But just lean over, talk to the person next to you, and start identifying what those goals are going to be, what you're going to take back to your court, to your community on this challenge that you've identified. How is it that you can make this happen? So let's go.
And before you start, I would just also add, make sure that you use like the SMARTER acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-oriented for your goals. So go ahead and have the conversation.
I think I went over there so you can't kick me. I think I went over there so you can't kick me as I go off script.
No, you're fine.
And as my friends in Oakland used to say, for Rich, a day without an analogy is a day without oxygen.
And you want to have them like share a few of the goals?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to do that piece and then I'll come back and do 7?
By the way, thank you very much. I'm having a blast.
I know, I can tell. I'm glad. I'm glad you're here too.
Just remember, I'm the introvert.
So what's your problem you identified? Your 1-minute warning.
One-minute warning. Okay, if we can all bring it back in, please. Time. Let's all come back in.
Okay. I know. Your
Don't
attention,
make me
please.
use my teacher voice. Okay, the world is perfect now, right? You've solved everything. including how to make me stop talking. So your life is great, life is perfect, we're ready to go, right?
No.
Or do we at least have some goals that we've identified that we can work on and we can do something with? Is that a little bit closer to the reality which we're dealing with? So, what are some of the goals that we came up with during the course of this conversation?
Volunteer, please.
Overall communication in our scenario that we discussed is understanding, oh, sorry. I thought I project, but I'll need to make, not only the need to communicate, but identifying the stakeholders within that arena of communication, right? Who you're communicating to, what the purpose of the communication is, if it's coming your way, when that communication started, where it came from. One thing we used in our scenarios was something called like an echo chamber. If the issue happened in February and you're now hearing it in July, it really doesn't exist, but it's because it's kind of spread, and we, even though we know it's fixed, but perhaps the public or whomever it's impacting did not know that it was corrected. So there comes that communication of timeliness, but also understanding that the issue may not currently exist. So how do you communicate that out? You're kind of like 2 steps behind. So your goals are to try to either be with them or at least plan ahead.
So it sounds like you're talking about you want to give some real-time feedback when you have an issue or you resolve something so people know that it's resolved?
Yes, to that too, yes. But even when it is resolved, for example, this scenario was from Los Angeles, and yours was from when? Where? Alaska.
Okay.
Geographically, you may be covering a larger area. And then how do you cover that? Do you put that on your website? In their case, the media was involved, and so forth. So it's just understanding the different channels available to you and planning ahead. But real time, I guess that's
Okay, so a real-time response to things and identifying who's going to carry your messages forward. Who can you rely upon to get the messages out there and how?
That was part of it,
Putting
yes.
some type of strategy in place for that. Great, thank you.
Did I-
Yes.
We talked about public trust as it relates to warrants. And in the courts, oftentimes there are excessive outstanding warrants. I think most of us have that problem. And we tend to think that the people. This is my partner, who's also presenting this in the next session. But one of the things that's come to her session. But one of the things, that makes people very paranoid about going to court or being stopped in a traffic stop is they look them up and they say you have a warrant. Right. And they take them into custody. And so what we were talking about, and she's really doing something, but we were talking about really disaggregating the data on warrants and understanding why different groups don't attend. And she talks about homelessness. And she talks about the failure to get the message across. A lot of the warrants are issued and the court users have public defenders. Nothing against them, but they're overworked and underpaid. And oftentimes they will take the information, because most of the warrants are FTAs.
Fail to appear warrants,
yes.
Right?
And so the public defender takes the warrant and says, call me, and the person never knows.
So let me ask you one question to be real succinct. Tell me one thing that you will do that will reduce your FTAs.
Your turn.
Oh.
So our goal would be, like my partner said, disaggregating the data to do root cause analysis on why people are failing to appear. And we want to reframe failing to appear as what? As an institution.
So that's
have we
things.
Done wrong?
Okay.
And taking the burden back and taking it off impacted communities and saying, were we effective about communicating, reaching out, letting people know when their date was? Are there resources that can help with transportation or some of the issues that we know our communities are facing?
Can I offer you some feedback?
Sure.
So one specific thing that you will be doing is you will be taking and researching what's the reasons for FTAs by X date and providing that data to a specific person.
Yes.
That would be one of your specific goals.
Yes.
And so you would end up with like a number of goals listed like that. If you were talking about creating a more widespread communication that explains the process, We would create that message by X date and where we're sending it to. So those are what your specific things are. You can go back and share it with your chief judge or whatever, because he can come back and tell you, well, where's that communication? Well, where's that research? So that's why it's very key that it is a SMART goal and that it has a date and is time oriented. But those are great things to do.
And when you get back to the office and life takes over, because you've been out of the office for a week now, and I'm sure everything's been calm, nothing's been happening. You haven't had to check those emails, work's not stacking up on you. So you're going to go back to a hurricane, hopefully not a physical one, and you're going to have to work through that so it becomes really easy for the inspirational and aspirational goals that we're developing in this session or throughout the course of this conference to get lost in the muddle and the details of our ordinary lives. But by writing down these SMART goals on your worksheet, even if you do it now, you go back and do it on a break, what have you, now you have a means to hold yourself, and as you pass this on to your team accountable for what these goals are. And it becomes a lot more challenging, a lot like the heel of my shoe, to ignore that you made a commitment to do X. By Monday of next week, you're going to communicate with your chief judge and talk about the failure to appear problem and how you can enhance your communication. So do things so you can hold yourself accountable and you don't get this lost in all the details.
Now we're going to take it home with number 7. You need to develop the marketing for your message. What do you want to say? What do you have a budget to say? Who can help you say it? When can you say it? How can you say it? Where can you say it? What will you say? And formulate your sound bites. For our message at the Friend of the Court, we were like, one of the things were to actually to have a bench warning amnesty program. Do all of you remember the commercial Got Milk? We got a black t-shirt and said Got Warrant, and on the back it had the number to the Friend of the Court where you could resolve the warrant. So something very quick and catchy that you can pull someone's attention in. So take a minute and talk to your partner, a real minute, 60 seconds to talk to your partner about some of those ideas and come up with a catchy phrase. So go ahead and do that.
1 minute. Seconds left. Fifteen seconds. Five, four, three, two. We have liftoff. Okay. 60 seconds, that's all you need, right?
So just throw out some of the great slogans that you've come up with.
Oh, come up. In LA, we currently use something that says, get online, not in line.
Get online, not in line. Oh, who has one better than that?
Okay, we can't let California
that.
drop the mic on us.
So definitely you want to say something that's going to be said in a different way that catches the attention of all. So you can actually take your message and start reframing and developing that different relationship with the public. So you have the 7 stages there. We gave you a high, quick, down and dirty, fast-paced overview of what they look like. It took us a while to actually work through these stages when we were doing it, and then to go back and reflect, what did we do? Because we needed to repeat it for a number of different projects and a number of different issues. So if there are questions, please feel free to ask. But the most important thing is to remember to
implementation.
So do not have a piece of paper that's just going to sit there in your NACM folder. Take it back from Las Vegas and actually talk to people and put it in action.
And don't be afraid of what's going to happen here. I will promise you that you are going to stumble once or twice as you go through this process. As in anything else in your life, This will not be nice and pretty and perfect and what have you. You're going to have details. There's a reason these things are challenges for your court and for your community. If they were easy, you would have solved them already. But you're going to wade into the muck and the mire of your community, of people's lives. When you're dealing with things like failure to appear warrants, you're touching upon issues like homelessness, like poverty, like literacy, like limited English proficiency, like a stable address. So we can't just say, well, gosh, I don't understand why this person didn't appear. I always get the mail at my address. Well, guess what? Not everyone lives in the paradigm of your life. So we have to reach out and make sure people understand that. And all too often we get caught up and we have people who look at life in a very binary fashion. I think that most of you will agree that life isn't quite that binary, that there's going to be some challenges that you're going to have to work through as you deal with these issues. Because life can be messy. And when you come to court, there's a reason you're in court, because things have gotten messy. If you work things out, you didn't come to visit us. Except for those happy reasons like an adoption. But usually something challenging happened to lead you to an adoption. So remember these, but don't be afraid to stumble. Don't be afraid to go back and rework the process. To re-look at who your stakeholders are, what your goals are, how you're going to accomplish this stuff. And make sure that you document what's going on. Make sure that you continue to bring new people in. That it doesn't become a clique or, gosh, only the cool people are in the failure to appear committee. You want people to know that they can be a part of this. That it's not an exclusive group, but you want your message to go out, not to be internalized and cloistered, because it's not going to do anyone any good if you do that. So make sure that you work on this together, that you get those stakeholders, you work with those champions, you find those people out in the community so you can get your message out there.
So one thing that I do as a part-time hobby is I actually lead vision board sessions. And I ask for everybody to close their eyes. Close your eyes. Come with me. Take a deep breath. Exhale. Envision that you have actually achieved resolution to whatever that challenge was, whatever that problem was. Envision that you put in the effort and that you've won. You've reached the finish line and the prize is yours. Slowly open your eyes. I should see a lot of smiling faces, a lot of happy court managers by now. So remember to take the plan home. Do not put it on the shelf. Share it with everybody in your office, everybody you know, and get to work. Because once you're engaged, you're on the road to creating public trust and confidence. So I want to thank you from Third Circuit Court, Zanelle Brown.
Rich Lynch.
And we want you to have a fabulous conference and the greatest success to you all.
Thank you all for coming.